The final keynote speaker at TNC 2014 is Martyn Dade-Robertson of Newcastle University. Martyn, you were talking about the relationship between data and architecture and data and infrastructure, and you started with a kind of nice example of physical space in a library. Can you just recap that story for us and how it led you onto your quest for creativity and learning?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that we consider now in a networked age is that the library is a kind of old model of information storage and retrieval, and that what we have now is this kind of incredible multidimensional information scape where anybody can access information in any time and in any order and structure. But one of the interesting things that I find is that it's in those relationships between the infrastructure and where it goes wrong that you can find I guess interesting patterns of information, or have ways of experiencing knowledge which is perhaps richer than we currently have in our online worlds, and that was what I was trying to get to in the presentation, really.
So the library example was where you were trying to track information in different piles of books and things.
Finding my wallet, actually. Yeah. Yeah, but yes, in effect, yes, that's exactly right.
So how exactly did the experience of trying to find where you'd left your wallet in a library get you onto this process of data visualization?
Well, what I realize is that the library, and actually buildings generally, are a source of data visualization. They're a representation of their function because of the way that they distribute people and they organize functions in space. And in something like a library, they are also the manifestations of a categorization system for all its weaknesses. So those are on display to you when you're in a library. You know when something isn't next to something else, when it is in your mind, that that's a limitation of that organization. So in a sense, they are sorts of data visualizations. They're just of a different sort to the ones that we would think of in information world.
So tell me about the ones that you have been using in the information world, and what you've been doing to sort of develop and experiment with those.
So because I'm not a technical person, I've had to try and learn some of the techniques to understand data from scratch. So one of the things I've been trying to do, for example, is to learn how to code. And there are lots of creative applications now that allow people like me who are not computer scientists to write relatively complex software, so things like processing. So data portraits comes out of that, really. It's an experiment in being able to take data, being able to treat it, understand it, then organize it, and then represent it in some way. And it didn't have very much value analytically, but it has a huge amount of value when it comes to understanding your material. And that's where I've been, really, trying to understand the material. Like an architect would understand what stone or wood can do. It's about understanding what information is, what its physicality, what its properties are, really.
And as a result, you created some works of art that have actually been quite well appreciated.
Well,
by,
I've sold some.
And
that was, yeah, and they've been accepted as pieces of art. I think that there's a hunger for a type of representation that makes this invisible visible, in effect. That's what people seem to respond to, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So in making beautiful works of art from data, with using data visualization, is there actually anything useful to come out of that?
I think so. I mean, the data visualization traditionally is thought of in terms of analytics. So it's about whether the data visualization gives you insight into data, and that's really, really important. But for me, it's also about data visualization of manifestation. It's about having the amount and complexity of stuff available and, in visualization terms, visual to you. That seems to me to be really important. Just as the library itself is not an analytical process, it gives people infrastructure that allows them to explore information. I think there's a role for data visualization there as well, and that's what the visualizations that we've been working on have been about.
And perhaps just to be impressed by the sheer scale and complexity, and so like walking into a huge library as compared to walking into a small library.
Absolutely. We're in the process of creating some of the most sophisticated infrastructure that anyone has ever created, but we can't celebrate it in the same way as when you go to see an incredible bridge. You know, you get to see that piece of engineering. Most of the sorts of infrastructure that people at this conference work on are only seen as being valuable when they're invisible, when they're not seen, when they're not understood, but people don't even have to worry about them. People only recognize it when they break, and I think that's a shame, actually.
So how would you like to work with this community, the research and education networking community, the infrastructure organizations perhaps also, to collaborate perhaps?
I think there's lots of potential there. I mean, one of the things that came up actually in the questions are that lots of people seem to have big data sets and very useful data sets that are currently not being used for anything other than for the kind of the purposes of the infrastructure that they've been created for. So I think having the opportunity to visualize that, and I mentioned this idea of the invisible university, this notion that through this infrastructure we've created another sort of campus or another set of campuses that we could realise and visualise, even if just to celebrate them, but I think also to build representations that are useful for them, that make it clearer that they are apparent and that people can interact with them maybe in more ways than they've been able to up until now.
So if anybody has any ideas or would like to explore any ideas, then they should get in touch with you, I
They
guess.
should, yeah, and I think there are potential European Commission funding projects and those sorts of things that it would be great for this sort of community to partner in. I think there's lots of potential there.